Good evening. Welcome to the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education General Meeting or Regular Meeting of October 18th, 2021. Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Sure. Mrs. Acosta.
Here.
Mrs. Bonifield.
Here.
Mr. Centers.
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Here.
Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mrs. Bradford says here. President Burton.
Here, and we have a quorum. Mrs. Bradford, would you please help us with the Pledge of Allegiance this evening?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to this evening's meeting. If you are present in our meeting this evening and you'd like a copy of the agenda, they can be found just outside the door to my left on the table. If you'd like to participate in audience communications this evening, you can also find blue slips on that same table that you can fill out and make sure they get sent up to our table so that when we get to that point of our meeting, I can make sure your name is called. This evening's meeting is our regular meeting or general meeting, or as some call it, a voting meeting. By that, we mean that the items coming before the board this evening have been discussed typically at least 2 meetings, our study session and our committee of the whole. So we have really discussed it and caught in all the questions and answers that we can think of on any given topic that's coming before us this evening and basically beat it to death over the last couple of meetings. Therefore, you may or may not hear the level of questions and answers that you might expect to hear. Please understand that that's not because we take any of these items lightly, but it's rather because we have discussed them at least 2 prior meetings. If you're looking for a lot of in-depth question and answers on different topics that are coming before the Board of Education on this given agenda, you may want to tune into the Committee of the Whole meeting. Those are the meetings where we really get into the greatest amount of detail. If you have missed that meeting, they're all available also on our website. You can find any previous meeting on the website, which is livoniapublicschools.org. And if you hover over the School Board tab and drop down to Board Meeting Information, you can find agendas and video of prior meetings at any time. The Board of Education takes very seriously respect that we teach our children in our schools. It's one of our character traits that we teach all the way from pre-K up through our post-secondary. We take that very seriously at our board level. You have our word that you will hear respect given to one another from board members and our cabinet team. We ask that anyone who's participating in our meeting this evening give the same respect to everyone else in the room this evening, and we will do our best to make certain that that's happening between all of us. We find no better way to teach our children than by example, and that's what we intend fully to do this evening. We have what's, by board standards, a relatively short agenda this evening, but we'll get right into it. The next item on our agenda this evening is item 3, communications, and 3A is our district update from the superintendent. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you so much, President Burton. If you will turn your attention to one of the screens in the room, we have a number of highlights from this past month. We're going to kick off with a little fall fun. In terms of many of our schools host fun runs in the fall. It's one of our PTA fundraising events and also just a great opportunity for a school community to come together. So our first few photos highlight just a few of our schools that participated. We start with Webster's Walkathon, always a great tradition. Here we have the color run. Many schools have begun to incorporate that opportunity to have a little fun by using the color packets, and by the time the fun run is done, or in some cases the fun walk, because they like to get a little more color, they are a very, very bright and vibrant by the time they are through. This was the color run at Roosevelt. And here, all of our students at Rosedale, they had to reschedule. They were originally scheduled for the Friday prior, not last Friday, but the Friday prior. The rain would not hold off, so they rescheduled for Monday. They used the Churchill track where their neighbors right behind them, and they had an opportunity to have a great afternoon there last Monday. Finally, with some pictures from Kennedy Elementary's color run, which was also quite the event. Next, many of each of our middle schools have held a 7th grade activity event, so you'll see some pictures there. These were held right after school, so students could just stay after and hang out for a couple of hours, and an opportunity for 7th graders to get to know one another, to get to know the staff, new to the school, so really had a lot of fun. And there you see Mr. English on the left, I think, getting doused, and then some different races happening, so lots of fun was had by all. Last month, we shared with you the highlights from Franklin's homecoming. This past couple of weeks, we had homecoming at Churchill High School, and then most recently at Stevenson High School. And yes, Stevenson does still have the floats. Those floats were there, being made back in the 80s and probably prior to then as well. So great traditions and a wonderful evening. We have lots of celebrations, so the next few slides highlight some of our staff and some of our students that have done a particularly fantastic job. So first, I'd like to acknowledge the Churchill Marching Band under the new direction of Matthew Van Ham, who recently joined us this year. They earned a Division I Superior rating at the MSBOA District 12 Marching Band Festival last week. And this superior rating was based on musical performance, visual performance, and general effect. So as always, they wowed the crowd. You might have read recently that Webster, our very own Webster Elementary in Livonia Public Schools, was recently named the top elementary school in the state of Michigan by the U.S. News and World Report. Webster was also, you might remember, recognized as a blue ribbon school last year. So congratulations to our Wildcats. Coach DiFilippo, who is also a physical education teacher at Frost, was recently named Coach of the Week by the Detroit Lions organization. As you know, Churchill has had quite the season, and has just, Coach DiFilippo has done an outstanding job of working with his students both on and off the field. So congratulations to him and to our Chargers. I don't know if you saw this highlighted. Mrs. Jenkins highlighted this earlier this month, but one of our middle schoolers, Lily Bowen, wrote, produced, and starred in a new web series called The Cooler Crew. So it can be viewed on YouTube Thursdays at 5 p.m. So congratulations to her for her creativity and her zest, her drive. What a wonderful job, already a filmmaker in middle school. We had recently some national merit semifinalists. As you know, this is quite an accomplishment. These students have been recognized from Churchill High School, and so we congratulate them for their efforts. And then we also have 4 students, it's a little bit harder to read, but 4 students, and I'm going to pull them up on my screen so that I can go back and read both sets to you. How about that? My eyes are not as young as they used to be. So from Churchill, we had Harish Janiskar, Anna Novak, Om Tripathi, Audrey Turnage, and Ethan Webster. So from our Churchill High School class of 2022. At Stevenson High School, National Merit Scholarship Letters of Commendation went to Patrick Ferris, Emily Mitchell, Ava Hanchan, and Aditya Pradhan. And I realize I'm clicking on my screen and not on here. So here are our Spartans with this wonderful commendation. Mark your calendar. We have some special events coming up in the district. First, we have our LPS Education Foundation annual luncheon is back. So this benefits the Competitive Edge program, which begins a deposit into a 529 savings program for all of our kindergarteners in the district who sign up. So this will be held on November 10th at St. Mary's Cultural Center. If you'd like more information, you can certainly contact our office or lpsfoundation.org. We have 2 special events the same weekend, but multiple nights, so you have a chance to hit both of them. Kappa is presenting Matilda, November 12th through the 14th. At our Churchill High School Performing Arts Center. And the Franklin players are presenting The Little Shop of Horrors. They've added on Thursday, so they're running Thursday through Sunday, and Churchill's running Friday through Sunday. So please be sure to get your tickets. If you go on our website, social media, or each of the school's websites, there is a QR code, and you are able to choose your seat, buy your tickets, and you will be set when you walk in the door. Rick Austin Memorial. Rick Austin, a wonderful educator and coach within Livonia Public Schools. There is each year a memorial 5K in his honor that will be held virtually on November 13th. So if you visit the Rick Austin Memorial 5K page on Facebook, there are registration details, or you could contact Mr. Haig, Athletic Director at Churchill High School. Finally, this week, we are hosting our middle school and high school families for parent-teacher conferences. Last week, we held our elementary parent-teacher conferences at the K4 and 5, 6 level. So we certainly value this time with our families. We are grateful for that partnership, and we look forward to welcoming our secondary parents this week and thank all of our elementary parents who attended either in person or virtually at their choice last week. And I wanted to highlight our PTA and PTSAs. As you know, our Livonia PTSA Council was recently named Council of the Year for the state of Michigan. And this was recognized at last month's board meeting. In the meantime, our units have really been posing many membership challenges between our schools. It has been a ton of fun. If you have not had a chance to support your child's PTA or PTSA, please consider doing so. They just provide so much for our students, our staff, and our schools. And I'd like to just give a thank you to everyone involved in the fall family photos for our LPS Education Foundation. We had dozens and dozens of families come out to enjoy this. We had 2 of our cabinet members, Mrs. O'Brien and Mrs. Jenkins, along with 2 of our parent volunteers. Could you remind me the names of our parent volunteers? Amy Kotrich and Caroline Schreiner, who both also volunteered time, and we had families come through at Greenmead with a donation of $25 and were able to get their family portraits, raising almost $4,000 for our LPS Education Foundation. So it was a win-win all the way around. And finally, we have just a few more weeks to support the Be Kind campaign. You might have seen those large signs out front our school, or out front our building in many schools, where you can be the I in kind, literally. Stand in front of the sign, take a picture, do an act of kindness, and share that on social media. There are also these signs available at the UPS store at 5 Mile in Newburgh. The Be Kind campaign, which is organized by Rosedale Gardens Presbyterian Church, the City of Livonia, the Chamber of Commerce, and Livonia and Clarenceville schools are putting together a staff appreciation for December. So we encourage you to be part of that opportunity. And as a reminder, our wonderful communications department assembles really those good news posts from social media all week and puts them into a Friday roundup on Twitter and on Facebook. So we encourage you to tag your school, and please include the hashtag Livonia Pride so that we can add your posts to the roundup. And we would also love to have you join our team. We have spots for you in food service, transportation, and school-age childcare, which is care for our students before and after school at our elementary schools. So please visit the Careers tab on our website if you are interested in any of those positions. And finally, I think I've said finally 3 times, so I'm just letting you know it's actually coming. The end is coming of this presentation. A reminder, in all seriousness, of our social emotional hotline, which was put in place back in March of 2020 and has been accessed many times by students and families. This is available. This is available to you in the evenings, on the weekends. This social emotional hotline is available to our students, both via email and phone, as well as to our families. If your child is struggling and needs a hand, we are here to help. So President Burton, that really was the final slide. Thank you so
very
much
You
for
have a lot to
allowing
celebrate.
me an opportunity to share many points of pride within our district.
Thank you. I would remind everyone in our audience this evening that masking is required. This is a mandate from Wayne County Health Department. It is something that we are required to do. We ask everyone in attendance to mask at this time, please.
We will not be put on a mask because...
We will be at recess. We will return shortly. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the continuation of the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education regular meeting of October 18th, 2021. Thank you for your patience during our brief recess. The Wayne County Health Department did issue a mandate on August 27th, 2021, requiring all persons, be they students, staff, or visitors inside of any educational institution to wear a mask or other suitable face covering. We do not have an option as to whether or not to comply with that. It is a mandate. It is a requirement of all persons inside of an educational institution. If our students or staff are outside of our buildings, the same requirement does not apply. But while anybody is inside the building, it does apply. We don't have a choice. We are required to abide by and enforce that. The next item on our agenda is written communications. Do any board members have written communications that they need to share at this time? No. All righty. The next item on our agenda is audience communications. Audience communications is a time designed designed by the board to listen to comments from the citizens in our community. It is not a question and answer session, but rather a time that we set aside to listen to members of the community. If your question is directed toward the roles of the Board of Education, you can expect a response from the board. The roles of the Board of Education, as you may be aware, are to hire and evaluate the superintendent, to set policy for the district, and to set the long-term or strategic goals of the district and align the finances to those goals. Therefore, if your question pertains to those areas, you have a question that you're asking for a response to, you can expect your response to come from the Board of Education. If your question pertains to anything else, we generally call that daily operations issues, which frankly most things fall under that category, you can expect a response from our superintendent or our administrative team. We do have a time limit of 3 minutes per participant for audience communications. The reason for our time limit is so that we can be fair and equitable to everybody who speaks to the Board of Education. We do, as I said earlier in the meeting, you do have our commitment that we will be respectful to every speaker who speaks to the Board of Education, and we do ask for the same respect in return. We will set a timer for each person as they come up to the podium to speak. If you hear the timer going off, you can know that you've hit your 3 minutes, and that's your cue to kindly wrap up your comments. We do that because we find that to be more polite than to interrupt a speaker. So if you hear that timer going off, you know you hit your 3 minutes, and we would appreciate you wrapping up your comments at that time. I will take the audience communications in the order that the slips were given to me. Our first speaker this evening is Julie Hardy. Mrs. Hardy. And if you could state your name and your city for the record, we would appreciate it.
My name is Julie Hardy.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you tap it, as soon as the screen's gone.
My name is Julie Hardy. I live on Hillcrest Street here in Livonia.
Feel free to adjust that microphone if it's not
Short.
right.
Last month, I came to this school board meeting to express my frustration with our current mask mandate in LPS. Since the mandate is still in place, I've decided to come back. My husband is a physician, and he shares my frustration with this mask mandate. Many parents I know don't want their young kids forced to wear a mask, but they have resigned themselves to these arbitrary rules. Most parents are exhausted and don't feel like their voice matters. I'm not tired, and I'm not going to get tired of complaining about this mask mandate, and I believe my voice does matter, or at least it should. Our young children are more likely to die from drowning than COVID. They're more likely to die from car accidents than COVID. They're more likely to die from pneumonia. They're more likely to die from the flu than COVID. Have we ever masked during a flu season? Or did we use common sense, like washing our hands and requiring sick kids to stay home? I have a daughter who just turned 2. If I wanted to enroll her here in Livonia at Jackson Center, she'd be required to wear a mask there. She still sleeps in a crib. She's 2 years old. Does that seem crazy to any of you? As her mother, it's my job to weigh the cost and benefits of everything she does. Getting her vaccinated, letting her have some screen time, driving with her in a car, taking her swimming. I am her mother, and I should be allowed to decide whether a mask over her face is necessary. There are many negative effects of masks: physical, psychological, emotional. Masks have been shown to promote bacteria growth, and they can be harmful to a child's development. Most countries in Europe and the World Health Organization recognize that the decision to mask young kids carries with it potential academic and social harms and lacks a discernible benefit. Many countries exempt their young children from wearing masks in schools, including the United Kingdom, Ireland, all of Scandinavia, France, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Italy. I want to repeat, we're dealing with a disease that is less dangerous for our young kids than the flu, but we keep responding with more mitigation measures than we have during a flu season. We have no scientific studies showing that cloth masks are effective at preventing transmission among young children in elementary schools. Have any of you tried contacting the Wayne County Health Department requesting that the mandate be ended? Have any of you asked the health department for studies that do show the effectiveness of masks among young children? Are any of you willing to question the moving goalposts of the health department? I'm assuming the answer to most of these questions is no, so you can all assume I'll be back here again next month.
Our next speaker is Jacob Emmerich. Good evening.
Good evening. You thought it was going to be a quick agenda, huh?
Sometimes things happen.
I wanted to address an issue that I recently had with my son. I'm sorry, I'm Jacob Emmerich. I live over near Merriman and 6 Mile. I have 3 kids that attend LPS, kindergarten, 8th grade, and 11th grade.
Thank you.
Recently, my son was contact traced because a student that sat in between him and another student was COVID positive. My son was removed from class, asked if he was vaccinated, and he shared his medical information with the staff. I didn't agree with that. So he was removed from school for the quarantine. Homecoming festivities gone. The student on the other side of the infected child was vaccinated and was able to stay in school. Now, we all know that although you're vaccinated, you can still get COVID, and you can still spread COVID. So I really don't understand that. Maybe we can revisit that, look into that. I was also wondering if we are keeping track of these students that are being contact traced. Have anyone become positive, COVID positive? I don't think so. Hospitalization rates for these students. Has any students been hospitalized over COVID? Probably not. The other issue, that particular classroom, all the desks are pushed together. Why? I mean, can we have 3 feet between the desks? I understand the class sizes are an issue, but that particular class, there was not an issue. The desks could be pushed apart. This is high school. So there was that. I know you guys are working diligent to try to get bus drivers. I'd like to see a little more transparency on what's going on. I get emails showing all the bus cancellations, but are we getting applicants? Why are they not applying? Is it because they have to wear a mask all day on the bus, driving the bus? I love our bus drivers. I talk to them every day when they pick up my kids. Also, are they having to do extra chores? Are they sanitizing after each route? Something they didn't have to do pre-COVID. And if they are they being compensated for that? And I saw that all city employees got a $1,000 hazard bonus. Did the bus drivers get it? Probably not. So, I think that's about it. Is there anything else?
About asking the kids without parental.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I was told by the administration at the school, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, no pun intended, but I don't think it's right for these administrators to ask my children if they're vaccinated or not. I still received a call from them anyways, letting me know what was going on. Ask me. If they have any medical questions about my kids, come to me, not my kids. So, and don't punish the kids that aren't being vaccinated. I mean, it's just not fair to send my kid home and because he's not vaccinated when the other kid could be spreading it too. And I don't want to see anybody get sent home, period. Let's just end this and roll with the punches. So, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kelly Dobson.
Hi.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Kelly Dobson. I'm NOLA, and I have a grandson that attends Hoover. And I wanted to share with you today a picture I took just this afternoon of his skin on his face from wearing a mask since the beginning of the school year. I wanted you to see what his face looks like. He's 7, and he looks like he has the acne of a teenager. He's 7. Wearing a mask causes a person to have 13 times greater risk of a respiratory infection. And I can say with firsthand experience that that is true. Since the start of the school year, my grandson has been sick twice with respiratory illness, and it's not COVID. He's not had COVID. He's had 2 respiratory illnesses from wearing a mask. For the record, my grandson had a full summer of activities that included gathering with many other children, both indoors and outdoors, and not once did he get sick all summer. It wasn't until this board took our right as parents and grandparents to decide what's best for our children that he got sick. This is the result of your policy, of your mask mandate. Your job is to educate, not to make health decisions. That's my job and his mother's job. My grandson is among many in this district with a speech issue, where he needs to see faces in order to learn to form words correctly. Your mask mandate robs him of that precious time he needs to learn these skills. This is the second time I've come to the school board meeting to address this mask mandate. The first time many of us came here in good faith to express our concerns to this board. Our efforts were sincere, but this board listened to us under false pretenses. The way I understand it is that you work for us, but you had already decided what you wanted to do with this mask stuff, and the decision was already made. Are you going to listen to us this time? That's all.
Our next speaker is Frances, it looks like Janice, but I may be mispronouncing that. Good evening.
I'm pretty well new in this district. We're still in the process of moving into our house. And
Welcome.
in the process of moving to Livonia, I was reading on some social media about an incident. And I did want to talk to you about it. I read about an incident at Stevenson High School, which is in our district, where racist cyberbullying took place. People attacked a young girl, anxious black girl with slurs at her first experience. They attacked her via airdrop with racial slurs at the football game for homecoming. And it was simply horrifying as a parent to hear. The lasting harm that could come on this girl, affecting her mental health and relationships moving forward, is so saddening and outright wrong. It is yet another example of the hate speech that is not currently regulated as far as I have found in our district. We need a clear policy stating that hate speech will not be tolerated and outlining the consequences for incidents of it clearly so that teachers and administrators know how to respond directly and appropriately. Consideration of how to sufficiently repair the harm inflicted, and a sit-down meeting with all involved students and parents individually or as a group to mediate and educate should be required. Our students and children's psychological, mental, and emotional health needs to be protected. We need a zero tolerance policy for hate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As a factual correction, Livonia Public Schools does have a very serious no tolerance policy on such behavior. The incident in question was brought to our attention and it has already been handled by our administration. But thank you for bringing it to our attention in case it had not been. Our last speaker is Tanya Hung. Is Tanya still present with us? Seeing that, I only have one other factual correction, and that is that the mask mandate that is currently in effect for Livonia Public Schools is that of Wayne County Health Department. It is not that of Livonia Public Schools. It is required of all public and private education institutions in the county of Wayne. It will remain in effect as they have written it right now until there are 14 days 14 consecutive days of our Wayne County case numbers being in the moderate or low category. That is the law under which we are bound at this time. Is there anybody else who is wishing to take part in audience communications? Seeing none, we will move on to response to prior audience communications, of which I have none. The next item on our agenda is item 4, our consent agenda. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mrs. Bonnefield.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the following consent agenda items as recommended by the superintendent. 5A, minutes of the regular meeting of September 27th, 2021. 6A, approval of 2020-2021 school dairy purchase.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. Are there any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Seeing none, we have a motion for consent agenda by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Sorry.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. President Burton.
Yes, and that motion passes. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is item 6, business matters, and 6B is the approval of financial statements for the 2020-2021 school year. And we have Mrs. Smith.
Wasn't sure if I was right now or coming up, so sorry if I jumped the gun a little bit. Are we good? Okay.
I'm sorry. We do need a motion. I apologize.
Perfect.
May I have a motion on this item, please?
President Burton,
Mr. Johnson.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the 2020-2021 audit report as presented by the audit firm of Plant Moran.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And now we'll turn it over to Mrs. Smith. Good
Thank you,
evening.
President Burton, and thank you, Board. I appreciate the time that we've been able to spend over the last few weeks going over the results of our 2021 school year. As you know, we've had Plant Moran in the district for a number of weeks, both in June and then again in September, to review our records, making sure that we're in compliance with all the requirements that the state has, the federal government has for our grants and whatnot. During the study session, we had the opportunity to go over our budget to actual report, and we went over that in detail. And then last week, we had Lisa Vargo and Tom Marchese with us to go through the financial statements. And I'm happy to introduce Tom Marchese, who will be joining us to go over, again, a presentation similar to what we saw last week at the committee meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tom.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Allison. Good evening, board members.
Good evening.
Thank you for having me here tonight. As Allison mentioned, we were engaged by the board to perform our audits. Our audit is comprised of 2 components: our federal awards audit, which is commonly referred to as a single audit, and the basic financial statement audit. So our procedures and the phases of our audit go from all the way back to April and May, where we do some planning, information gathering, and risk assessment to identify any significant events that have happened at the district over the course of the fiscal year 2021. And once we identify any significant items, we'll tailor an audit approach and gather evidence to support the figures reported by management. So we employ statistical sampling, analytical procedures, test of transactions, and go into a very high level of detail in order to ensure that the district is accounting for items correctly based on prescribed guidance. With that, after we have everything documented, we'll provide an opinion on both the federal awards audit and the basic financial statement audit. So we're pleased to announce that we were able to provide an unmodified opinion on both the basic financial statements and the federal awards report on compliance. This is the highest level of assurance that we can provide as an audit firm, and it's a very high bar and level of scrutiny that the business office needs to meet to attain. So it's certainly a testament of the business office for the result. And I should announce too, The major programs that we tested for the federal awards was CRF, the Coronavirus Relief Funding, and ESSER, or the Education Stabilization Fund. So this first slide just provides the balance sheet of the governmental funds. You can see that the three major funds this year were the general fund, the special education fund, and the 2021 Series 1 fund. So the biggest component on this balance sheet that's of the most helpful to the board and community members would be the fund balance, or the fund equity as labeled here. So the general fund is the main operating fund of the district, and the general fund had fund equity of about $33 million at fiscal year end. Of that, $6.7 million was assigned related to planned use of fund balance in the fiscal year 22 approved budget. The restricted fund balance in the 2021 Bond Series 1 fund is sourced from proceeds of the community-approved bond issuance that occurred, and the district received these proceeds in June 2021. So these proceeds are restricted for capital projects expenditures within the district in the next few years. This next slide's the budgetary comparison schedule for the general fund. It offers a glimpse of the precision of the budget to actual results. So you can see that the revenues and expenditures were within 1.2% of the budgeted amounts, and it resulted in a favorable variance of $2.6 million of general fund balance. So the board had approved a final budget expecting to use a fund balance of $3.3 million. It came in at $651,000, resulting in the favorable $2.6 million variance. So precision levels based on sound budgeting that we view are about 1 to 3%. So you can see that the district's variances are well within that range. And again, the low budget variances just illustrate to the community that the business office, the district, are good stewards of the funds being used at the district. So this next chart breaks down the general fund revenue. So you can see that the biggest chunk of the pie is the state source revenue, 115 of the $156 million. This is represented by the state foundation allowance that's driven largely by the district's enrollment. The next piece is property taxes in the local source bucket, followed by the Wayne County enhancement millage of about $6.1 million. And lastly, we have an annotation at the bottom that this data excludes funded project fund activity. So this funded projects revenue it tracks specific funds that are separately subject to federal and state compliance requirements, and it's a very common approach that you see across districts and academies throughout the state of Michigan. So the next slide presents a breakdown of the general fund expenditures. So you can see there's $156 million of expenditures for fiscal year 21. The biggest pieces of the pie relate to the retirement costs, employee benefits, and salaries and wages. This represents about 89% of the total district's general fund expenditures. Within the other two buckets, you have supplies and purchase services. Those experienced a slight uptick from the prior year based on the district's COVID response. The next two slides provide some commentary on GASB 68 and 75. This is accounting guidance that focuses on the proportionate share of the district's retirement system liability. So the Michigan retirement liability or retirement system is underfunded by billions of dollars. States across, or districts across the state record and report these liability amounts for their share of that underfunded liability for the retirement system. So nearly all Michigan districts will show a deficit in net position for the government-wide statements. It has no impact to the fund level statements, and the district has no decision-making authority over the amounts that are paid into this retirement system. So by no means is the district expected to make whole on the liability at any point in the near future. So the next slide provides an overview of the impact of the GASB 68 and 75 liabilities. You can see for the government-wide statements, it's about $400 million, resulting in a net position deficit of about $275 million for the government-wide statements, but there is no impact to the fund level. This slide provides an historical trend of the general fund revenues and expenditures over the past 10 years. So this was the first year since 2014 that the district experienced a slight downtick in fund balance. It was a planned use, as we notated on the previous slide. The board had expected a bit more of a fund balance use during fiscal year 21, but it is the first time since 2014 that fund balance has decreased. This final slide just demonstrates the district's fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. So the district's fund balance as a percentage of expenditures is a key metric that the state uses to measure financial health of a district or charter school in the state of Michigan. So you can see all the way back in, the district had a fund balance of about 2.7% back in 2013 and 14. You can see that it's risen in recent years all the way up to about 20%. That's above the MSBO recommended guidelines of 15 to 20%. And the statewide average as of June 30th, 2020, which is the most recent data available, is about 15.9%. So Livonia is ahead of their peers relative to the statewide average as of last year, and within that range of MSBO guidelines. We're just above it. So some importance to why does fund balance matter? I think this past school year, fiscal year 21, highlighted just uncertainty that can occur at the flip of a switch. In June of 2020, the district was facing budget cuts from the state of up to $10 million by some estimates. And with the fund balance that Livonia's accumulated over the course of the past 5-6 years, they were able to absorb a potential hit without making drastic cuts. They were able to, there's certain benefits such as foregoing borrowings and reducing interest cost on the district. The district's able to be more proactive in their cuts instead of being reactionary to these potential funding cuts. So with that, there's uncertainty that remains going forward. We mentioned the ESSER dollars and the coronavirus relief funds that the district received over the course of fiscal year 21, and that represented about $4 million in additional funding in the funded project fund this year. It increased federal expenditures by about 50%. So this is a finite allocation. It's one-time revenue depending on the extent of any future stimulus that may happen. But these are certainly items to monitor going forward as the pandemic continues, and there's certainly uncertainties regarding the state's bounce back, enrollment changes going forward, and even inflationary pressures that could be monitored moving forward when you proceed with budgetary planning and future spending plans. So with that, just would like to say thank you again, and open it up for any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Marchese. And questions or comments from board members? And this is one of the items that we discussed at length at our meeting last week. So we may have fewer comments or questions than normal, but that would be why. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Burton. Mr. Marchese, I'm going to go back a year or so where this underfunded balance that the GASB requires us to show. And my recollection was that at that time they were saying it would take until 2038 to eliminate not just ours but the entire balance. Is that still the projection, or has that changed? Do you know?
I think it changes depending on who you ask. I believe that last year the number was based on an assumption that changed this year and added some liability to the pie. So they are doing their best to break even on that liability sometime in the future by raising the contribution rates, by adding additional state funding, such as the 147C dollars, to every district that participates in the program. But it is an expectation that they ultimately break it down to a net zero impact on all districts across the state sometime in the future.
Okay, it's just a moving goalpost at this time.
It seems like it,
Okay.
Mr. Johnson.
All right, thanks.
Comments or questions from other board members or the superintendent? A quick question for either you, Mr. Marchese, or Mrs. Smith. And I remember we discussed this last week, and I don't remember what the answer was. Our fund balance shows slightly above 20% right now, and yet I know it to be slightly under. And can you explain the difference?
Yes. That's related to the funded projects fund. So in the eyes of the state, the funded projects and the general fund are all general funds. So when we report our data up to the state, that's how they view it. But as Tom mentioned tonight, a number of districts choose to keep their grants in a separate fund just for additional tracking purposes, and so that's what we do. So I know when we went over the budget to actual, I think it came in at just under, was it 19.2, something like that?
Yep.
And this is when we do include all of what the state considers the general fund, why it's slightly different. So,
Okay, great. Thank
Yep.
you.
I will, if you, of course, we can answer more questions, but I did want to take a moment just to thank our community. As you can see on that last slide where it showed the fund balance, as Tom mentioned, we were looking at a fund balance of under 5%, right around 2.5% not too long ago. And just for reference, the state considers a fund balance under 5% as a district with high probability for financial hardship, so that was one of the objectives with the Wayne County Enhancement Millage, and thankfully our community did support that back in November of 2016, and that is probably the main reason that we are where we are today in terms of our financial stability. And so I just want to thank the community again for that support. As we've talked about too, again, to reassure the community on that one slide, we saw that the revenues just fell below the expenditures this year, and I did want to reassure everyone that again was planned. And part of our objective with creating financial stability wasn't to create an unlimited fund balance. We want to use the funds that are provided to us on the students in front of us today, but not at the risk of jeopardizing future students. So we do want to have that comfortable find a comfortable zone where we feel comfortable that we have enough to weather the storms, like a $650 per pupil cut, finding that out at the end of May, for your budget that's ending in June. If we didn't have that fund balance, we would have been having very different conversations last year. So it's because of that fund balance we could ride out that uncertainty. So again, a big thank you to our community for that support.
So our fund balance is recommended to be, through MSBO, it's recommended to be between 15 and 20%, and we are currently 19.2%.
Yes,
Okay,
right in
great.
that sweet spot.
And thanks to you and your entire department and our entire LPS staff community that we are able to set a budget that's going to keep us in a safe position and then meet that budget. So that's
Exactly.
very appreciated.
And thank you, President Burton, you've reminded me to thank, we have in the at our meeting this evening, Stacy Sofer, our finance manager, who's been instrumental in managing these funds, and a thank you to the rest of the business office. It is something that we take very seriously, obviously, these funds that have been entrusted to us by our taxpayers, and we take that very seriously. And I'm so glad to have the unmodified opinion from our auditors that can give our community that reassurance that things are being handled properly here.
Excellent. One other point I wanted to make, Mr. Marchese, when you mentioned borrowing, it's something that many Livonia Public Schools needed to do a handful of years back, coming out of the recession, and many districts did. The purpose of the borrowing was because while our school year begins on fiscal July 1st, the state changed, a number of years back, changed when they begin giving our student payments out, and those now begin coming October 1st. So if we don't have enough fund balance to cover our district for payroll for those periods of a few months, we would have to be in a situation of borrowing. And many, many districts, and Livonia was one of them, had to do that and then had to incur the costs of doing so. So that is one of the reasons that just a handful of years ago that did cost us money in order to do that. So it's one of the reasons that a fund balance does save us money on an every year basis.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Those teachers still get paid during the summer, even if the state aid does not come in September and October. So.
All righty, thank you. Any other comments or questions from the board or superintendent? Again, thank you, Mrs. Smith, to the entire accounting department, our finance department. It is not taken for granted. Those of us our entire board attends a session in the beginning of January for updates on law and finance, and you attend with us. And every January we are firsthand appreciative again of all the things that you take on and make sure that we are compliant with and that you're aware of. So there are many times during that day-long session we look across the table at you and you just nod and say, yes, we've got that. So we very much appreciate it. And Mr. Marchese, thank you so much for the weeks that you and your team spent doing the audit here. We're glad that our finance department was able to give you everything that you needed in a timely manner. And it feels good to know that a firm such as Plant Moran that is so well versed in school finance has given Livonia Public Schools their highest opinion of our finance department. So thank you very much for your work here.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Ms. Burden.
Thank you. Mrs. Oquist?
I just wanted to reiterate my comments from last week specific to the single audit, which was in regard to the CRF and the ESSER's funds. As we shared, those funds were all new to the district this year. No district in the state had ever received those dollars, and they each came with a separate set of guidelines, restrictions, requirements for certification about how those dollars are being spent, which is all extremely appropriate. But that was all information that our finance department had to clearly learn about, report on to the state as well as to our auditors. And so we were actually pleased that that was the single audit area that was chosen for even more close review for the practices and protocols. And again, that came with an unmodified opinion as well. So just really, there are some things that obviously our team is very familiar with and have been for many years. And even with some slight changes here or there, it's generally the way we do business. This really came into a very new way that we do business. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you both for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
We have a motion by, let me see here, Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Bradford for the approval of the financial statements for the 2020-2021 school year. Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. Thank you all very much to the many folks who were involved in that. The next item on our agenda is item 7, instructional matters, and 7A is the approval to purchase COGAT testing materials. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of COGAT and Iowa testing materials from Riverside Insights for a cost of $31,492.76 for testing 6th and 8th graders and identifying students for our academically talented programs. This purchase includes online testing licenses for both tests and training on how to administer the tests online.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And I believe it is Mrs. O'Brien who's going to be helping us out with this one.
It is. Thank you, President Burton. We are recommending the purchase of COGAT testing materials. This year, we would like to provide this nationally normed assessment experience for our 6th and 8th graders online. Last year, we did it online due to being both remote and in person, and our teachers found it a good experience for our students to take online. So we are going to give it to them utilizing both Chromebooks in the classrooms and our computer labs in our 6th and 8th grade classes. And then our Iowa Basic Skills Test is used for identifying students for our academically talented programs. Both tests come out of the Academic Services Department assessment funds, which periodically the state has grants that I apply for that help augment the cost of those funds. There was none last year, but the previous year there were, so we'll be looking for additional funding in order to support this. So we are requesting that $31,492.76 for the purchase of this testing materials.
Great, thank you. Are there questions or comments from the superintendent or board members? No? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval to purchase COGAT testing materials. And Mrs. Bradford, will you please take the roll?
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mr. Centers?
Yes.
President Burton.
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is item 8, personnel matters, and 8A is teachers for approval. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and offer employment for the 2021-22 school year to the teachers listed on the attached document.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mr. Johnson. And we're going to hear from Mrs. Keats and Mr. Abate on this.
Hello, thank you, President Burton. The two prospective staff members we're presenting to the board this evening come from the highly sought-after teaching areas of music and library and media science. They are well qualified to fill their respective positions and have been fully vetted through our extensive interview process. We are confident they will perform at a high level and represent Livonia Public Schools in a manner that is consistent with our shared vision and collective commitments. These positions have also been included in the 2021-2022 budget and fill areas of need, significant areas of need for our district. We're pleased to be recommending these two talented individuals to join our LPS family, and with your approval, we're excited to have them working with our students.
Thank you very much. Are there comments or questions from the superintendent or the Board of Education?
Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations, and welcome to the Livonia Public Schools team here very shortly, as soon as we get this motion passed. We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mr. Johnson, for teachers for approval. Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mr. Centers.
Yes.
President Burton.
Yes, and that motion passes. Welcome to the Livonia Public Schools team of teachers. The next item on our agenda is teachers for tenure. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mrs. Bradford.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and acknowledge that tenure status has been granted to the following teachers effective on the respective date. Jill Fox, October 17th, 2021. Tracy Jubenville Lutz, September 30th, 2021.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mr. Centers. And Mr. Abate, Mrs. Gates.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Our teachers for tenure on the agenda this evening have successfully completed the district's requirements for probationary teachers, including years of service, evaluations, overall performance, and documentation of student growth. We have carefully reviewed all supporting materials along with the recommendations of our building administrators and have determined these educators should be granted tenure with Livonia Public Schools. We wish to congratulate these members for reaching this milestone and look forward to their continued success working with LPS.
Thank you. Are there comments or questions from the superintendent or Board of Education members? We'd like to congratulate these folks on very meaningful and very successful initial time with Livonia Public Schools. We have a motion for Teachers for Tenure by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mr. Centers. And Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is resignations. That does not require a board vote. That is for informational purposes only. The next item on our agenda is item 8D, retirements. And may I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mr. Centers.
Of course, I clicked on the wrong tab now. Thank you. Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolution of appreciation for the services rendered by Carol Stewart.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Centers, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And Mr. Abate and Mrs. Keats.
It is not on. Apologies. We're back. So tonight we honor and congratulate our retiree from the Livonia Public Schools, leaving with 24 years of experience. On behalf of the administration, I would like to thank this wonderful staff member for the dedicated years of service they provided to the students of Livonia Public Schools. And we ask that the board please adopt the attached resolution of appreciation for our retiree.
Thank you. Are there comments or questions from the superintendent or board members?
Congratulations.
Absolutely.
Happy retirement.
Yes, and congratulations, and we wish Mrs. Stewart well in the next chapter of your life. We have the motion for retirement by Mr. Centers and supported by Mrs. Jarvis. Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. Mrs. Bonifield?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. The next item on our agenda is item 9, hearing from board members. 9A is the first reading of Board Policy JCAB, investigations and searches of individual students, lockers, and other personal property. Let's see here. Give me a moment here. We do not have a motion on this item, but this is up for a first reading at this time. This is something that, a policy that we've gone over at length, and Mr. Willenborg has been helping us with these policies. Mr. Willenborg, is there anything you'd like to add to this? And after you're finished, I'll see if we have any questions at this time.
Thank you, President Burton. I'd like to recommend the changes that we have discussed over the last 2 meetings regarding policy Juliet Charlie Alpha Bravo JCAB, titled Investigation and Searches by School Officials. You know, this policy shared is dated from 2001, and while its content is accurate, our Administrative Policy Committee felt some changes in the precise wording and language were in order. The legal concepts of search and seizure remain intact. School officials may not conduct unreasonable searches and seizures. However, school officials have a right to search a student and their belongings and their vehicles based upon reasonable suspicion. The exception to the reasonable suspicion standard is with regards to school lockers. Lockers are school property, and students must have no expectation of privacy in their school lockers. I recommend this policy move to a second reading at our next regular meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Willenborg. Again, the content of this policy has not changed, but the wording has been updated and cleaned up a bit just to make certain that we have absolute clarity on that. And we thank you and your group that has been working to make those policy changes to make certain that they are as clear as possible.
Thank you.
Are there questions or comments from board members? Okay, seeing none, we're going to put this on our agenda for next reading, or for a second reading rather, at our next meeting. The reason for that, if you're watching from home or from our audience, policy changes do require a reading at 2 voting meetings, not just one. So this is our first reading. It will be voted on at our next meeting. So Mrs. Bradford, can you put that on our agenda for
Yes,
a
I
vote
will.
at our next meeting?
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item is item 9B, second reading and adoption of board bylaws, BCBF, rules of order, BCBFA, quorum, BCBG, voting methods at meetings, and BCBH, minutes of board meetings. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mr. Johnson.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached documents for board bylaws, board operations, BCBF rules of order, BCBFA quorum, BCBG voting methods at meetings, BCBH minutes of board meetings.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mr. Centers. And I'm going to turn that over to Mrs. Opus at this time.
Thank you, President Burton. As we have discussed in our study session and our past 2 committees of the whole, these bylaws overall have served us well for many years. Originally written in 1988, or not originally written, but updated in 1988 and reviewed certainly many times since then. We had a couple of just minor tweaks to the wording, and so I'll briefly go through those. Under BCBF, this is in reference to that the board will utilize Robert's Rules of Order where such procedure does not conflict with the board's bylaws. That has certainly been the case for many, many years. Instead of referring to Robert's Rules of Orders as revised, we've added the verbiage most current version. So that would be the recommended change, and I do not believe there were any objections to that at our last review. Okay, moving on to BCBFA, quorum. We did have, we consulted with legal counsel because there was some question on the wording and the clarity of the wording as it related to the quorum and a majority. And so the new, the updated policy with the same intent reads, a majority of the members elected or appointed to and serving on the board is required to constitute a quorum. The same majority is required to approve a motion. So essentially that is what has been the practice for many, many years. And so we've updated the language to accurately reflect that. Board bylaw BCBG, voting methods at meetings. The only change to this indicates that voting shall always be by voice roll call, as we've seen here tonight. We did add that it will be recorded by the board secretary in order to have a record of that voting method. And the last one is minutes of board meetings. Primarily, the primary change made in this was the first sentence says, the board secretary shall keep a proper record of Board of Education proceedings. Previously, it did not have the Board of Education proceedings. It just said a proper record of proceedings. So just to clarify, we were referring to Board of Education proceedings. And then since we had the term secretary in there, each area where that term is located, we've added the word board in front of it to assure that the reference is to the board secretary. Not significant changes, but just, again, cleaning up bylaws as we continue through that process of updating language to be reflective of current practice and protocols.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments on any of these 4 bylaws that need to be that are being updated right now? Okay. And I would like to, on behalf of our board, thank Mr. Johnson, who consulted with MASB to get some of the trickier language on that majority voting situation nailed down so that language is very clean and very understandable. We think we all knew what it was intended to mean, but making sure that it's written properly and consistently with how the law reads is important. So thank you very much for your work on that. We have, are there any other comments or questions before we go to a vote on this? All righty. We have item 9B, second reading and adoption of board bylaws. The motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mr. Centers. Mrs. Bradford, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Centers?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford says yes. President Burton?
Yes, and that motion passes. Mrs.
We'll update those bylaws on the website and have that information readily available.
Thank you. And to Mrs. Oquist and our entire cabinet team, thank you very much for the work that you've been doing on policy and bylaw updating along with our board. It really is an ongoing process, but in addition to running the day-to-day of the district, we appreciate the time and effort that you've taken to make sure that these are updated. It is no small task.
Certainly.
The last item on our agenda is item 9C, hearing from board members. Are there any board members who have anything that they would like to share at this time? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Burton. I just want to give a thank you. As many of our community know, a week ago, the LPS Education Foundation held its Portraits on the Porch over at Greenmead. A couple of really nice days. And Mrs. Jenkins and Mrs. O'Brien, I'm surprised you're able to walk even now. They spent hours upon hours upon hours on Saturday and Sunday taking photographs on their feet most of the day. And it was a wonderful day. You guys did a great job. And on behalf of the foundation, thank you so much for everything you did. We really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Any comments from any other board members? Seeing none, thanks so much to all of you who have hung in there with us for us this evening. Thank you to our entire team that helps our meetings go smoothly. It's very much appreciated. We are now adjourned. We'll see you folks at our next meeting. Have a nice evening.